What happens when a black CEO pays for first class, but gets treated like she's invisible? This isn't just a story about a cold sandwich. It's about silent power, corporate reckoning, and the seat that changed an entire industry. Stay till the end to see how one woman turned quiet humiliation into global accountability. Naomi Ellis was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she walked into a room. Not because she demanded attention, but because power, when it's earned, doesn't have to ask. She had boarded countless international flights before, always in first class, always with the calm precision of someone who knew her place wasn't given. It was carved out, inch by inch. That day, seat 1A was hers. Not by accident, not by luck, but because she had earned it with every late night, every boardroom pitch, every door slammed in her face that she turned into a new entrance. Naomi wasn't new to luxury. She wasn't new to stairs either, the kind that flicker just long enough to clock your presence, but not long enough to acknowledge it. She was used to that. But she wasn't used to this. She had pre-ordered her usual, lobster bisque to start, a perfectly seared steak to follow, and a glass of Chateau Margaux. It wasn't about indulgence. It was a ritual, a quiet affirmation that she belonged. But then Lauren happened. The attendant, blonde, polished, polite in the way that makes your skin crawl, approached her with a tray that said everything her mouth wouldn't. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Lauren said, holding out a cold chicken sandwich. "We've run out of your meal. This is all we have." No apology, no explanation. Just a shrug, a weak smile, and a tray that didn't belong in first class, especially not in front of a woman headed to Geneva to finalize a deal worth billions. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply looked at the tray, then back at Lauren. "I pre-ordered last week," she said, calm, controlled, the kind of calm that carries weight. "Maybe the system wasn't updated," Lauren replied, already turning to leave. No follow-up, no offer to check. Naomi sat there, the cold sandwich untouched in front of her. Not out of pride, but because she needed to see it, to feel the full weight of what had just happened. It wasn't about the food anymore, it was the message. Around her, the rest of the cabin buzzed with quiet luxury. Laughter from seats 1C and 1D, champagne clinking, hot towels being offered to men who hadn't even looked up yet. No one asked if she was okay. No one offered her anything, because to them, this wasn't unusual. But for Naomi, it was crystal clear. She was the only black woman in first class, and suddenly, everything else, the cold tone, the indifferent glance, the absence of acknowledgement snapped into focus. This wasn't an accident. This was exclusion, dressed in a pressed uniform and a smile that didn't reach the eyes. And what Lauren didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Naomi Ellis didn't let things slide. Because Naomi wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just a CEO. She was the founder of Morgan Tech, a name that echoed through the halls of Silicon Valley and the skyscrapers of Wall Street. She had built an empire in AI and cybersecurity. She had been named one of Forbes' most influential women 3 years in a row. And she was headed to Geneva to close a deal that would expand her company's reach across Europe. But more than that, she was a woman who remembered every slight. Every time she was overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. She didn't forget. She turned it into fuel. So when Lauren walked away, Naomi didn't look down at the tray. She opened her tablet, pulled up the deal, pulled up her security dashboard. And with a few taps, she did what few passengers could. She accessed Stratus Air's internal staff records, thanks to Morgan Tech's proprietary integration with international partner systems. Lauren Shaw, Senior Cabin Crew, ID STA9035. The name pulled up more than just her role. 2 flagged complaints in the past year, both involving non-white passengers. Internal notes that tip-focused service was encouraged. Nothing overtly racist. Just enough to let someone like Lauren slip through. Naomi's face didn't change. She didn't need to shout. She opened a secure message to her assistant, Jade Monroe. Jade wasn't just an EA. She was a trained systems analyst, cyber forensics expert, and the one person who knew how Naomi moved when she was serious. Naomi typed the message. Initiate emergency audit protocol. Flight 917. Cabin crew ID STA9035. Confirm in 10 minutes. Then she put the tablet away, The sandwich stayed untouched. She sat back in seat 1A, her seat, and looked straight ahead. She didn't need a scene. She needed a shift. What came next wouldn't just shake Lauren. It wouldn't just ripple through Stratus air. It would echo through every boardroom that ever second-guessed a black woman's presence in a seat they thought wasn't meant for her. Because this wasn't about lunch. It was about power. And Naomi Ellis was done playing polite. 8 hours to Geneva. 38,000 feet in the sky. And not a sound from seat 1A. But beneath that calm exterior, Naomi Ellis was already dismantling a system. The plane hummed with the low murmur of conversation. Cutlery clicked gently against porcelain. Somewhere behind her, a man laughed about crypto, and someone else made a toast to the next billion. No one looked her way. That was the point. Naomi reached for her smartwatch and tapped it twice. A subtle vibration followed. Confirmation received. Jade Monroe was already on it. Back in Manhattan, Jade Monroe sat in Morgan Tech's command suite floor-to-ceiling windows, LED screens aglow with data streams. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, unlocking access to aviation data partners, service feedback logs, and internal employee profiles. She didn't need to ask Naomi what happened. One look at the flagged ID, and she understood. Another Lauren, hiding behind protocol. Within minutes, Jade unearthed patterns. A black passenger in 2022 denied a pre-ordered meal. 2 Asian travelers reporting late service. An Indian businesswoman ignored after pressing the call button 3 times, and Lauren Shaw had been on every single one of those flights. No disciplinary action had ever been taken. The excuses were always the same: system error, miscommunication, insufficient evidence. Jade smirked. She pulled up Morgan Tech's private bias detection tool software Naomi had helped design. It analyzed tone, eye contact, response speed, and service patterns using crew footage and smart cabin sensors. Lauren's interaction score? Bias indicator, 87.4%. Repeated patterns of neglect toward non-white passengers. 15 instances on 36 flights. The system flagged it as a high-risk cultural liability. Jade compiled the data, encrypted the file, and sent it to Stratus Air's internal compliance inbox flagged as urgent. She attached one note. Behavioral risk confirmed, recommending immediate cultural audit, as requested by Morgan Tech. Naomi, still seated in 1A, didn't need to see the reply. She already knew what would come next. Her smartwatch vibrated again. Message received, confirmed. CEO Thomas Greer has been notified. Audit team activation in motion. She leaned back into her seat, crossing her legs. Meanwhile, Mark Duval, the other flight attendant, was making his way down the aisle with refills. He smiled warmly at the men in 1C and 1D. "Another round of champagne for Mr. Radcliffe and Mr. Malcolm?" he asked, calling them by name without even checking the manifest. Naomi's tray still sat untouched. No one asked if she wanted anything else. Mark passed by again. This time, she raised her hand. Not high, not dramatic. Just enough. He paused. "Yes, Miss Ellis?" Her voice was gentle, but sharp. "I'd like to ask about Stratus's meal prioritization policy." He blinked, hesitated. "Of course. I'm a Diamond Plus member. I ordered my meal a week ago, confirmed by email. Yet my order was missing. Meanwhile, other passengers are receiving 5-course meals. What's the protocol when there's a shortage?" He looked nervous. Typically it's first come, first served, also based on tier status and meal confirmation times." She tilted her head slightly. "So, by all standards, I should have been prioritized." He nodded reluctantly. "Yes, that's correct." "Then why wasn't I?" Silence. Mark shifted his weight, eyes scanning the cabin, like the answer might appear on the ceiling. "It's possible there was a crew-level override," he finally muttered. "Sometimes individual staff make real-time adjustments." Naomi smiled, cold and clean. "So it's not about system error, it's human error. Thank you." Mark stepped back, clearly rattled. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Naomi returned to her screen. The dots were connecting fast, and not just for her. Behind her, Lauren was still moving between rows, offering dessert options with fake warmth and selective hospitality. She leaned in closer to Mr. Clayton than necessary when refilling his glass. She called Radcliffe Sir and praised his choice of wine, but she never returned to Naomi, not once. 12 minutes later, a new message arrived. Encrypted. A full report. Flight attendant, Lauren Shaw. Internal ID, ST-A9035. Behavior notes. May 2023. Complaint by VIP passenger. 3 consecutive service errors. August 2023. Internal crew memo flagged for selective prioritization. November 2023. Requested removal from premium cabin rotation due to guest perception risk. Outcome, no action taken. Naomi didn't react. Her breathing was steady. Her fingers tapped once, twice, then stopped. This wasn't rage. It was clarity. She opened a new message and addressed it to 3 legal contacts she had worked with on past discrimination cases. 1 in Paris, 1 in New York, and 1 in Geneva. She attached the report, added a subject line, Stratus Air, Flight 917, urgent request for immediate ethics investigation, documentation enclosed. She CC'd the CEO of Stratus Air, and then she closed her tablet. The tray still sat in front of her like a monument. Cold sandwich, wilted lettuce, warm water in a plastic cup. She didn't touch it. Outside the window, the sky darkened into velvet blue. Inside the cabin, the lights dimmed, a normal flight for most. But for Naomi Ellis, it was the moment everything shifted. She didn't need to fight for her seat. She had already secured it. What she was doing now was something bigger. She was making sure that next time, no one would have to fight for theirs. The hush of altitude wrapped around the cabin like a velvet curtain. Naomi Ellis sat motionless, her eyes scanning the dark horizon through the oval window. Below them, somewhere beyond the clouds, continents shifted, borders blurred. But inside this metal shell, nothing had changed. Not yet. She didn't need more confirmation. She had everything. Behavioral reports, recorded inconsistencies, AI-verified data. Her message had reached the Stratus CEO. The audit had been triggered. Every step had unfolded exactly as she'd designed, quiet, methodical, undeniable. And now, as the cabin lights dimmed and Mark Duvall brought out dessert carts for others, she sat silently with a half-filled glass of warm water beside her untouched sandwich, still a visual insult placed neatly on a silver tray. When the pilot's voice crackled overhead, announcing they were now passing over Canadian airspace with 7 hours left until Geneva, Naomi opened her phone again. She typed 6 words. Redline 917. Begin system trace. Redline 917 wasn't just a file name. It was an internal protocol within Ellis Tech, a digital sweep that could cross-reference partner systems for violations of cultural integrity and ethical codes. Reserved only for critical breaches that posed reputational risk to high-value clients or strategic relationships. As the message sent, her fingers paused over the screen. A photo lit up. A throwback. Naomi, 10 years ago, standing alone outside the Ellis Tech startup office, a basement. Back then, with a whiteboard and a prototype AI module behind her. She had been smiling in that photo, but there was a quiet steel in her eyes. The same look she had now. Back then, no one took her seriously. A black woman in tech, a solo founder with no VC backing and 0 Ivy League connections. She remembered one investor saying to her face, "You're impressive, but you don't really look like a tech CEO." And she had just smiled and said, "That's okay, I'll let the system catch up." That memory lingered now, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The battle wasn't new, only the field had changed. Back in Manhattan, Jade Monroe leaned over her desk, eyes sharp behind blue light glasses, scanning incoming logs from Stratus's Geneva systems. She'd decrypted the employee service record database. She'd run the cabin footage through their proprietary AI pattern recognition. And now the final piece loaded. Passenger service timestamp matrix. The system analyzed every guest interaction on Flight 917, time between call button and response, meal delivery delays, frequency of acknowledgement, name usage, eye contact duration. The result? Naomi Ellis, average response time, 6 minutes, 11 seconds. No name recognition, no dessert offering, no towel service. Other first-class passengers, average response, 42 seconds, full name usage. Triple service interaction, personalized beverage recommendation. Lauren Shaw had skipped Naomi in every category. Jade flagged the discrepancy, embedded screenshots, and added it to the report. Final file name, Stratus Air 917 Report Ellis Tech verified. She sent it to 3 inboxes simultaneously. 1. Thomas Greer, CEO, Stratus Air. 2. Internal Compliance and Ethics Board. 3. Geneva Legal Affairs, International Service Standards Division. Subject: Systemic service discrimination, confirmed pattern, immediate action required. She exhaled deeply and pushed her chair back. The screen glowed with a single notification: delivery confirmed, review pending. And Jade knew. The next time Lauren smiled at a passenger, it wouldn't be under Stratus's banner. Back in the sky, Naomi watched the reflections of soft blue cabin lights dance along the surface of her phone. She wasn't tired. She was waiting. The hum of the aircraft had faded into background noise. The men in seats 1C, 1D, and 2A were deep in conversation, still joking about crypto investments, Eastern markets, and the new wave of AI startups. Their laughter had that unshakable timbre of people used to being heard. None of them noticed the storm gathering just feet away from them. That was always how it started. Disregard, distance, dismissal. Until it wasn't. Naomi tapped her watch. A small message appeared. Compliance alert acknowledged. CEO Greer convening emergency review. Legal team on standby upon arrival. Cabin crew will be met on tarmac. She smiled slightly, not with triumph, but with validation. She looked again at the untouched meal in front of her. It wasn't food. It was evidence. Every crumb of it. Then she reached down, opened her briefcase, and pulled out a slim leather portfolio. Inside, her notes for the Geneva summit. Charts, strategy outlines, impact forecasts. She flipped to the back and began writing something new. Not for the merger, not for the investors, for the crew of Flight 917. Service, she wrote, is not a smile. It's intention. It's respect. And when you only serve those who look like you, you're not offering hospitality. You're enforcing a hierarchy. She paused. A white glove doesn't make injustice cleaner. It just hides the fingerprints. Back in Geneva, Thomas Greer sat alone in the executive suite of Stratus Air headquarters. He had just received the final report, every page, every data point. He read silently. Each line sank deeper. Naomi Ellis, not just a CEO, not just a VIP, a symbol. And Stratus Air had failed her. The knock came gently. His assistant entered with a single line. They've landed. Audit team is in position. Greer nodded. And far above him, still descending through the clouds, Naomi Ellis sat in seat 1A with her back straight, her phone silent, and her resolve unshaken. She didn't need to make a scene. She had already changed the script. As the plane began its descent into Geneva, seat 1A remained still. Naomi Ellis's hands rested calmly on the leather armrest. Her phone was off, her tablet tucked away. But in her mind, everything was turning like gears in a finely tuned machine. No one else on that flight had any idea what was unfolding behind the curtain of first-class comfort. The men 2 rows behind her were still laughing about a business deal in Prague. The hum of idle conversation drifted across champagne glasses. And Lauren Shaw? She was making her final rounds, adjusting napkins and tossing empty bottles into the trolley with the grace of someone who believed her shift was over. She had no clue it had just begun. Naomi sat quietly as the landing gear locked into place. The cabin jolted ever so slightly, and the lights dimmed in preparation for landing. She glanced once more out the window, the sky above Lake Geneva clear, the sun casting a late afternoon golden hue across the water. A subtle vibration on her wrist. A message. Redline 917 confirmed. Crew under active review. CEO and legal will meet you at gate. Naomi didn't smile. She just nodded. The wheels touched down with a low, even screech. Passengers applauded lightly. Naomi didn't move. She waited. Let everyone else fidget with seatbelts and carry-ons. She had no reason to rush. The real work was already done. When the doors opened and the air of Geneva swept into the cabin, the first people visible weren't gate staff. They were two figures in dark suits standing just beyond the threshold. One of them, Brandon Ellis, Stratus Air's regional CEO for Europe. The other, a short, stern-faced woman holding a slim digital tablet. Legal affairs. Lauren didn't see them yet. She was at the rear, still prepping for disembarkation, still in character, still in control. For now. Naomi stood slowly. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, picked up her Hermes bag, and stepped into the aisle. Not a glance backward, not a pause, just the grace of a woman who knew exactly what she'd set in motion. As she stepped past the legal team, they bowed slightly. "Miss Ellis," Brandon began, his tone deferential. Naomi didn't stop walking. "No need to apologize," she said, calm and low. "This is just the beginning." Behind her, the team straightened. They understood. The data had spoken. The video had spoken. Naomi had made sure the system would answer for itself. At the back of the plane, Lauren walked out with the rest of the crew, unbothered, recounting to Mark Duval how one passenger had acted like a queen over a menu mistake. "Some people just take it too far," she laughed. And then she saw the suits. 3 of them standing at the crew exit. One raised a tablet screen. Flight 917, Emergency Review Protocol. Crew to report immediately to interview room 2. Mark froze. Lauren blinked, confused, still trying to process. "What's going on?" she asked. But no one answered. They didn't need to. This wasn't a question anymore. This was accountability. Naomi moved through the private terminal lounge, guided toward a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door silently. Inside, a message from Jade Monroe had already arrived. Video footage reviewed, passenger testimony archived, Lauren suspended, HR and legal convening full ethics hearing. CEO Thomas Greer requesting private consultation. Geneva board informed. No fuss, no noise. Just the weight of institutional consequence catching up to an action disguised as routine. Naomi settled into the seat and watched as the airport disappeared behind her. The limousine turned onto a quiet boulevard lined with chestnut trees. Geneva looked peaceful, polished, proper. But beneath that surface, a storm had begun. At Stratus headquarters, the internal memo was sent. Subject: Flight 917 discrimination review. Immediate action required from the desk of CEO Thomas Greer. Effective immediately, employee Lauren Shaw is suspended pending further review. All first-class crew members from Flight 917 are under evaluation for behavioral compliance. A full audit of the past 24 months of service data is underway. We acknowledge the failure of our internal systems to detect and address discriminatory service behavior. This must be corrected. We have invited Naomi Ellis, CEO of Morgan Tech, to advise on structural reform for our service culture. Hours later, inside her hotel suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Naomi sat by the window sipping herbal tea. The room was silent, her inbox full. She had received over 50 requests for interviews. CNN, BBC, Bloomberg. She declined them all. Instead, she opened a letter. A 16-year-old girl from Florida had written to her after reading the article in Forbes. The girl had been told by her school counselor, "High tech isn't really a place for you." Naomi picked up a pen and began to write her back. "You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to act, at the right time, and never walk away." She paused, then added, "P.S. If they tell you seat 1A isn't for you, ask them who the system was built for." At that moment, across Geneva, 3 young women of color hospitality staff, low-level employees at various airlines, sat in a small meeting room, waiting. Naomi had invited them, not to speak, to listen. They told her stories, about being overlooked, about managers who didn't call them by name, about passengers who assumed they were invisible. "We want to speak up like you," one said. Naomi shook her head gently. "I didn't speak up," she said. "I let the system speak for me. I just made sure it couldn't look away this time." 3 days had passed since Flight 917 landed. The name Naomi Ellis was trending in over a dozen countries, but not because of a speech or a scandal or a viral video of someone yelling in the aisle. No, she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stormed off the plane. She had barely moved, and yet the ripples she left behind were crashing like waves on a very polished shore. At Stratus Air's global headquarters, an emergency board meeting had been called. In the center of the conference table sat a stack of documents, printouts of passenger data logs, a forensic audit of cabin service footage, and a report titled Flight 917, Behavioral Analysis and Discrimination Risk Summary. CEO Thomas Greer sat at the head of the room, eyes steady. Around him were legal advisors, brand consultants, and the head of the cabin operations division. None of them spoke. The atmosphere was dense, the air too heavy for casual chatter. The video began playing on screen. A still frame. Lauren Shaw standing beside Naomi's seat, holding the uncovered tray. A voice calm, almost bored, said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We've run out of premium meals. We only have cold chicken sandwiches and water." Silence followed. Then the overlay comparison. White first-class passengers. Average time to meal delivery, 7 minutes. Addressed by full name, 100%. Beverage and dessert options offered, 100%. Naomi Ellis. Meal denied, no name used. Beverage not offered. Dessert not mentioned. Total interaction time, under 90 seconds. A service director shifted in his seat. "There's no way to spin this," he muttered. Greer tapped the table once. "We're not spinning anything." He looked across the room. "This isn't about one crew member. This is about a pattern we allowed to become invisible. And someone just made it visible again, without saying a word." The next morning, Stratus issued a rare global statement. "We acknowledge the existence of subtle, unchecked behaviors in our premium service. We are initiating comprehensive reform across all levels of our hospitality staff. The service we claim to offer must be equal, intentional, and accountable." The memo went further. All staff were required to complete unconscious bias training within 90 days. Naomi Ellis was invited publicly to serve as a cultural advisor to help rewrite Stratus Air's internal service protocols. She didn't accept right away. She didn't need to. The system had already begun its own reckoning. Meanwhile, at airports around the world, something new had begun to appear on gate monitors and social media feeds. Seat 1A. A hashtag, first posted by a writer in Toronto, had gone viral overnight. "You don't have to sit in Seat 1A to demand dignity. You just have to stop letting people tell you where you belong." Tens of thousands of stories followed. A woman in Hong Kong wrote about being overlooked by concierge staff at a luxury hotel until she mentioned her company's name, and suddenly everyone remembered her reservation. A black father in Boston shared how a flight attendant once handed out champagne to every passenger in business class except him. "I guess my hoodie didn't match the glassware," he wrote. Every post ended with one line. "Because I don't sit in Seat 1A, but I deserve respect." Naomi sat alone in her suite overlooking Lake Geneva, phone screen glowing with story after story. She didn't retweet. She didn't post. She simply read. She listened. That had always been her strength, not reacting, not shouting, but understanding when the moment was right to make something permanent. When Jade Monroe called that evening, her voice was quiet. "It's working," she said. "They're not just reacting to you. They're reflecting on themselves." Naomi looked out the window at the lake's surface, smooth as glass. "I didn't want revenge," she said. "I wanted the system to hear itself, loud enough that it couldn't pretend it was quiet anymore." The next morning, an unexpected email arrived. Subject, Seat 1A, redefined, from Stratus Air, to Naomi Ellis. "Miss Ellis, Following the events of Flight 910 and in consultation with our Ethics Advisory Board, we have renamed Seat 1A on every Stratus aircraft worldwide. From now on, it will carry a small gold plaque. Seat 1A, reserved for change. Thank you for reminding us who we serve and how. Naomi sat back in her chair. She didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. Later that week, as she boarded her next flight, this time to Cape Town, to speak at the Global Leadership Forum, she stepped into the first-class cabin quietly. The attendant greeted her with a nervous smile, but addressed her by name. "Welcome aboard, Miss Ellis. We're honored to have you." And there it was, just in front of her seat. A small golden plate. No branding, no logo, just 3 words, reserved for change. She sat down, fastened her seatbelt, looked ahead. The sky outside was wide and waiting, and for the first time, it felt like the cabin had room for everyone. While Naomi Ellis soared over the Atlantic toward Cape Town, a different kind of turbulence shook the ground back in Geneva. The HR Crisis Center at Stratus Air was no stranger to employee reviews. But this wasn't routine. This was the largest internal investigation the airline had conducted in over a decade. And at the center of it all, one tray, one cold sandwich, and one very silent refusal. Lauren Shaw sat stiffly in interview room 2. The once composed face that had smiled its way through luxury cabins was now pale, twitchy, and beginning to fray. Across from her sat Rachel Kincaid, head of global service culture, flanked by a compliance attorney. Neither spoke for the first minute. The silence said enough. Lauren finally broke it. I just did what I usually do. I didn't mean anything by it." Rachel raised a brow, but didn't nod. "Do you recall serving the premium meal to Seat 1A on Flight 910?" the attorney asked. "I thought the system glitched. We didn't have enough. Sometimes that happens." "And yet," Rachel replied, voice flat, "Seat 1C, 1D, and 2A all received their pre-orders. Seat 1A did not. Despite ordering 7 days in advance. Despite being a Diamond Plus member." Lauren opened her mouth, closed it again. Rachel continued. "Do you also recall referring to Miss Ellis as the woman in 1A, while using the full names of other passengers during service?" Lauren hesitated. "I wasn't trying to offend anyone. Intent is not our focus," Rachel replied. "Pattern is." Then she slid the tablet across the table. The screen showed Lauren's internal messages from the past year. "Bread and water's enough for some of these people. Another Michelle Obama wannabe today. Black passengers always act like they're CEOs." Lauren's jaw tightened. That was joking. It's sarcasm. Office banter. Rachel leaned forward. "No, that's bias. It may not be loud. It may not wear a white hood, but it walks into cabins, calls some people sir and others miss, and decides who's worth time and who's worth leftovers." The lawyer spoke next, calm but piercing. "You've been placed on indefinite suspension, pending full disciplinary hearing. Should further corroborating evidence emerge, this may result in permanent dismissal and industry flagging under Aviation Ethics Protocol 9C. Lauren swallowed hard. "You're making me a scapegoat." Rachel's reply was instant. "No, you made yourself an example." Meanwhile, across the hallway, Mark Duvall was having his own reckoning. Unlike Lauren, Mark had never said anything overt. No emails, no recorded jokes. But his silence had been noticed. The way he averted Naomi's gaze. The way he avoided answering her direct question about policy. The way he leaned into the comfort of ignoring what didn't concern him. "You witnessed the meal issue?" the investigator asked him. "Yes." "Did you raise it?" "No." "Why not?" He hesitated. "I didn't want to cause conflict mid-air." The reply was met with silence. The investigator tapped a pen against the file slowly. Conflict wasn't created by truth. It was created by omission. Back in New York, Jade Monroe reviewed the internal audit logs from her corner office. The server had processed 24 months of behavior analytics across premium cabins, and the findings were damning. Naomi had only been one of dozens. A black female entrepreneur on Flight 411, served last despite boarding first. An elderly Asian man whose seat wasn't acknowledged for beverage service. A Latina executive who received a downgraded meal on 3 separate flights. The pattern wasn't loud, but it was persistent. Jade created a final report, 170 pages long. Title: Coded Silence, Systemic Disregard in Premium Service. She submitted it with a recommendation for 1. Full retraining of premium cabin staff. 2. Creation of a diversity accountability panel. 3. Public commitment to transparency in service audits. Within 48 hours, Stratus accepted all 3. Then came the conference. Not a press conference, not a PR stunt. A closed-door summit of executives from the top 10 international airlines quietly convened in Zurich. On the agenda, invisible bias in luxury travel. On the guest list, CEOs, ethics officers, brand managers, and Naomi Ellis. She didn't attend as a victim. She didn't show up as the woman from 1A. She arrived as a strategist, wearing a crisp ivory suit with a single gold pin. The logo of the Seat 1A Coalition, now officially registered as a nonprofit advisory group focused on equity in luxury industries. She stood at the podium, no notes in hand, and spoke softly. Bias is not always a scream. Sometimes it's a shrug, a delay, a missed name, a tray placed without thought. But that moment, for the person receiving it, isn't small. It's a story. One that repeats itself again and again until we're forced to ask, who do we think deserves respect, and who do we serve by default? Silence followed. Not the kind of awkward silence. The kind that fills a room when people realize they've been complicit too long. When she finished, she didn't linger. She walked off stage, handed a copy of her report to the International Service Standards Commission, and stepped into the elevator alone. Because she hadn't come to perform. She had come to correct. Outside the hotel, a journalist asked her for a quote. Naomi stopped, turned slightly, then offered just 4 words. Don't overlook the quiet. By the time Naomi Ellis returned to the U.S., her inbox had morphed into a mosaic of gratitude, outrage, and stories. Some came from CEOs. Others came from flight attendants, but most came from people who had no platform, no boardroom, no camera crew, no audience. Just memories of being passed over, ignored, smiled at without sincerity, forgotten while seated in plain sight. And they all ended the same way. Because I wasn't in seat 1A, but I should have been treated like I was. The movement had a life of its own now. Seat 1A had reached over 60 million impressions in a week. Schools were hosting diversity roundtables using Naomi's flight story as a case study. Luxury hotels quietly revised their training manuals. And for the first time in her career, Naomi was being contacted not just for her business insights, but for her ability to redefine power without raising her voice. Back at Morgan Tech headquarters in Manhattan, Jade Monroe was coordinating something different. Not a press release, not a campaign, a curriculum. Discretion and Bias in High-End Service, a tactical framework. Co-developed by Morgan Tech and a growing coalition of behavioral researchers, frontline staff, and sociologists. It wasn't about shaming brands. It was about equipping them. Making sure service didn't rely on personality, but on accountability. Because Lauren Shaw hadn't failed alone. The system had helped her succeed. Stratus, for its part, wasn't hiding anymore. Thomas Greer, usually a behind-the-scenes executive, stepped in front of a camera for a formal address posted across their international channels. He didn't begin with excuses. He began with Naomi's name. We failed a guest, but more importantly, we failed ourselves. When we forget that luxury without dignity is just decoration, we lose the essence of who we claim to be. He paused, then added, We're grateful to Miss Ellis not for her silence, but for her precision. And we are rebuilding our system so no one has to carry that burden again. The video went viral, not because of flair or drama, but because for once, A company admitted it had been too quiet for too long. In Geneva, a new plaque had been installed at the private terminal. It didn't mention the airline's name. It didn't describe the incident. It simply read, "In honor of those who were overlooked, may this be the last time." Beneath it, etched in brass, Seat 1A, reserved for change. But change wasn't just happening in lounges and on runways. It was happening in boardrooms. 3 major investors sent memos to over 20 hospitality brands demanding transparency in service equity metrics. Shareholders, often silent on cultural issues, were now attaching deliverables to funding. One investor wrote, "If a cold sandwich can bring a billion-dollar brand to a reckoning, what else are we missing?" Naomi declined every interview, every TV spot. Even Oprah's team had reached out. She had no interest in becoming the face of a moment. Her eyes were set on building a model for the future. So when she was asked to speak at the Global Fairness and Design Summit, she opened her address not with statistics, but with a story. "I didn't say a word on that flight, but that's what made it echo louder. You see, when systems are quiet, they hope you'll stay quiet too. But what they forget is we don't need volume. We need timing and evidence and the will to say no more." Then she paused and added calmly, "They gave me a sandwich. I gave them a mirror." Weeks later, a training video was quietly added to Stratus Air's internal staff portal. Every new hire, every promotion candidate, every service audit lead was now required to watch it. The title card, Flight 917, a lesson in presence. The footage, a reenactment. Naomi seated in 1A, the tray, the silence, the turn of her face, the voiceover, not hers, but Jade Monroe's. This isn't about a mistake. It's about a moment, and how many times that moment has been allowed to pass without consequence. Then the screen faded to black. Words appeared. "Remember who you're serving. It's not just a name on a manifest. It's a life that has earned this space." Naomi didn't watch the video. She didn't need to. She was already working with hospitality schools to build better programs. She was already consulting for 3 other industries with similar blind spots. She had already moved on. But Seat 1A hadn't. It was still there, still shining, still waiting for someone else to sit down and refuse to be dismissed. By the 2nd month after Flight 917, something had quietly changed in the way people moved through spaces. In first-class cabins, in corner offices, in tech boardrooms and hospitality suites. There was a new kind of awareness, not fear, not caution. Awareness. The kind that made people pause before overlooking the one black woman in the room. The kind that made someone double-check a name tag before assuming who the assistant was. The kind that made luxury staff ask, "Are we actually serving everyone, or just the ones we expect to see?" And while Celeste Morgan had already shifted her focus to her next international expansion project, the world hadn't stopped whispering her name. Because Seat 1A was no longer just a seat. It was a symbol, and symbols don't retire quietly. In a classroom at the Wharton School of Business, a professor placed a still frame on the projector. Celeste Morgan seated calmly, eyes forward, cold sandwich tray untouched. "Tell me," she asked the room, "what changed here?" A student raised her hand. She didn't resist with anger. She resisted with strategy. Another added, "She understood the system better than the system understood itself." The professor nodded. Exactly. She didn't just highlight a gap. She made them accountable to the silence they built around that gap. Then she gestured toward the quote on the bottom of the screen. "Don't overlook the quiet." In Cape Town, at the Global Leadership Forum, Celeste took the stage again. Not as a keynote, as a mentor in a closed-door round table of next-gen founders. There were 15 of them seated in a circle, women from Lagos, from Seoul, from Detroit, one from Brazil who had just closed her first $2 million seed round, another from India whose fintech app had just been acquired. They weren't there to ask Celeste for tips on scaling. They were there to ask about dignity. "How do you know when to speak?" one of them asked. Celeste smiled, not with amusement, but with respect. "You don't speak when it's loud. You speak when you're ready to be remembered." They nodded, silent. One woman teared up. She was the only black woman at her startup accelerator and had been told more than once that her voice was too intense for pitch meetings. Celeste leaned slightly toward her and said softly, "Intensity doesn't threaten systems. Truth does." Meanwhile, Becky Whitmore had disappeared from public view. But internally, her name remained. Not on a blacklist, on a case study. Stratus Air had partnered with 2 major universities to launch a research initiative called Bias by Design. The first module, Flight 917, Failure of Presence. Becky's behavior wasn't held up as evil. It was framed as common, conditioned, excused. "This isn't about one employee," the intro stated. "This is about what happens when civility masks exclusion, and when no one is taught to notice the difference." Thousands of frontline workers across 5 countries took the course in its first month. For the first time, service design wasn't just about luxury. It was about ethics. Celeste, back in New York, kept moving forward. She was finalizing a $300 million data security deal in the UAE, onboarding 2 new executive leads, both women of color, and launching a quiet initiative under Morgan Tech's foundation. It was called the Presence Project. Its mission? Fund travel and accommodations for underrepresented founders invited to global conferences. Provide equity-focused media training to ensure they weren't misrepresented. And offer silent advocacy teams, people like Aaliyah, who monitor the system in real time and respond with action, not just reaction. Because no one should have to fight a battle while trying to pitch their vision, the mission statement read. Meanwhile, the airline industry wasn't done reckoning. At the annual International Aviation Ethics Summit, Charles Edmonds stood on stage beside Celeste, not as an apology, but as a partner. He addressed the room. "When Miss Morgan showed us our blind spot, she didn't demand our downfall, she demanded our integrity." Then he turned toward her and said, "Seat 1A may have once been reserved for status. From now on, it's reserved for accountability." The applause was quiet, respectful, earned. Celeste spoke next. "Not for long. We didn't need a revolution, we just needed receipts, and a seat we didn't have to ask for." Months after the incident on Flight 917, something remarkable began to happen. Airline customer service metrics, once focused on comfort and speed, now included dignity audits. Hospitality companies introduced a new KPI, Presence Respect Index, tracking not just service delivery times, but tone, acknowledgement, and guest name usage across demographics. But most tellingly, tech platforms, those that had long claimed to be neutral, were now tracking micro-patterns of exclusion as a legitimate category of harm. It didn't happen because Naomi Ellis gave a speech. It happened because she refused a sandwich. And instead of asking for another, she asked why. At a global investor forum in Singapore, a panel of venture capitalists discussed the future of inclusive innovation. One of them, an older white man from a top-tier fund, shifted uncomfortably as another panelist asked, "Would your fund have taken a chance on Ellis Technologies back when it was just an idea led by a solo black woman in cybersecurity?" There was a pause. He didn't dodge it. "No," he admitted. "We probably wouldn't have, but that's why we're now reworking how we evaluate leadership. Because if someone like Naomi had to prove herself 3 times over, the problem wasn't her. It was our lens." In a boutique hotel in Madrid, a housekeeping supervisor posted a memo in the staff break room. It had a photo of a tray, a cold sandwich, a plastic cup of water, and beneath it, handwritten in red marker, "This is what bias looks like when it wears a uniform. Don't be Lauren." It wasn't hostile. It was honest, and it worked. Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe near Bryant Park, Naomi sat across from a woman in her early 20s. She had applied for an internship at Ellis Technologies, not because of the job description, but because of the story. "I want to build," she said, "but I also want to stay whole while doing it." Naomi stirred her coffee. "You don't stay whole by avoiding the system," she said. "You stay whole by learning when to let it speak for itself and when to rewrite it." The young woman leaned forward. "How do I know when it's time?" Naomi smiled. "You'll feel it. It starts as discomfort, then as silence, then as a choice." At the same time, Lauren Shaw, now off the Stratus payroll, sat in a modest office building in upstate New York. She was working with a behavioral bias research team, not by court order, but by choice. Because even she had started to ask herself what she had never asked on that flight. Why did I decide that woman didn't matter? She'd begun speaking to new flight attendants as part of a peer correction initiative. Not to excuse her past, but to own it. I didn't think I was part of the problem, she told one group, because I was always polite. But that was the problem. I thought politeness was enough. She paused. It's not. Presence matters. Intention matters. And if you look at someone and don't see them, you're not doing your job. It didn't erase what happened, but it proved something even Naomi Ellis had once wondered. Can the system learn? Yes, when someone finally forces it to. Back in Geneva, at the edge of Lake Leman, a quiet event took place. No press, no stage. Just a ceremony at the edge of the tarmac where Stratus Air unveiled a new protocol, the presence policy. Every first-class crew worldwide was now trained with one core principle. All guests are seen, all voices are logged. If you overlook someone, the system won't. Naomi didn't attend, but they sent her the video, and at the end of it, a single nameplate glimmered on the back of a first-class leather headrest. Seat 1A, reserved for presence. A few days later, Naomi received a letter, handwritten, from a woman in Mississippi. I saved up to fly to my son's wedding. My first time flying first class. I was nervous. I thought they'd treat me like I was in the wrong seat. But when I sat down, the attendant smiled at me and said, "Welcome. You're in the seat of change." I cried. "Thank you." Naomi folded the letter and tucked it into her desk drawer, right next to her first Forbes cover and the business card from the startup conference where no one had remembered her name. She didn't need recognition. She already had something better. Proof. 6 months had passed since Flight 917. The world hadn't become perfect, but something had shifted. Not everywhere. Not always, but in ways that mattered. A pause before ignoring someone. A second look when deciding who gets the benefit of the doubt. A new question in service training rooms. Are we seeing who's here, or who we expect to be? Naomi Ellis never asked for that change. She demanded it, without ever needing to raise her voice. And that's what made it last. On a quiet morning in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Department of Transportation hosted a roundtable on bias in mobility systems. Representatives from rail, airlines, rideshare, and hospitality sat in silence as a single image filled the screen. A woman, composed, centered, a silver tray in front of her, a cold sandwich untouched. Seat 1A. The facilitator spoke calmly. This isn't about food. This is about who we see when we think of value. And what happens when someone claims space we didn't build for them, but who earned it anyway. They didn't need to name her. Everyone knew. At Morgan Tech's 10th anniversary gala, Naomi wore a matte black gown, no diamonds, just the gold bird-shaped pin on her collar, now the logo of the Seat 1A coalition. During her keynote, she didn't mention the airline, or the sandwich, or Lauren. She simply said this: power isn't given, it's practiced, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay seated and let the system explain itself. She paused, eyes steady across the room. I didn't ask to be seen. I expected it, and that made all the difference. The room rose in standing ovation, not because of the speech, but because they finally understood what that seat had meant all along. In classrooms, students were now taught the phrase, the 1A moment. It referred to the instant someone recognized silent injustice and chose strategy over rage, precision over panic. One professor explained it this way: it's the opposite of overreacting. It's knowing your value so deeply that when someone forgets it, the system ends up answering to itself. At a boarding gate in Nairobi, a little girl held her mother's hand tightly as they walked down the jet bridge. It was her first time flying, first time going anywhere beyond her neighborhood. As they stepped into the plane, a young flight attendant greeted them warmly. The mother handed over their boarding passes. Her seat? 1A. The attendant smiled. That's a very special seat, ma'am. We call it the seat of change. The mother blinked. Oh? Why? The attendant leaned in, her voice proud but soft. Because someone once sat there and reminded us how to do better, and now we remember. Later, on that flight, as the sun dipped low and streaked the clouds in hues of fire and rose, the mother looked out the window from seat 1A. A tray of food was placed gently in front of her, hot, thoughtful, complete. She wasn't a celebrity, not a CEO, not a tech mogul. She was a nurse, heading to a conference, flying first class for the first time in her life. But in that seat, at that moment, she was fully seen. And that's what Naomi Ellis had wanted all along. Not fame, not justice wrapped in outrage. Just a seat that no one would ever question again. A seat that said, "You are here, and you matter." As for Naomi, she continued building. Quietly, globally. And on every flight she took, she no longer needed to look at the service tray, or the attendant's eyes, or the temperature of the meal. She had already altered the coordinates, so that the next woman in that seat would never have to wonder, because seat 1A now belonged to everyone who'd ever been told, without words, "You don't belong here." And now, it quietly replied every single time, "Yes, I do."